Okay, for those joining this live stream, this is another episode in our series of internal design review meetings. This particular one is about a feature of our symbolic neural net framework. Specifically, this new function called net evaluation function. So the idea is to provide a wrapper around neural networks that provides for properly packaged pre-processing and post-processing. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
Um,
we have a template for the documentation page.
Oh, good. Okay. And how far have we got with that before?
I mean, we laid down the design, and now we switch to use form function and the proper type validation of interpreter. So there are like some design issue we would like to discuss with you.
By the way, that format is not correct, as you know.
Yeah, this has to be updated. Sorry, it's not
the function version. Returned by. That seems kind of random.
The body of the description has been updated today. It's not the last version.
Oh, okay. I'll update it. Okay, but so what are the design issues that we have here?
So the most important one is that right now there's no way in interpreter to specify that you want an array of a specific shape. So I have them when I say in the second point in the agenda.
So wait a second. So we're using interpreter specifications to define the. This is kind of like the outer layer of the encoder for the neural net. Is that right?
Yeah, correctly.
And is that? I mean, how does that relate to what we're doing with the compiler type system, for example?
It doesn't, because that's not exposed.
Yet.
I mean, right now, yeah, but right now the only documented type system that we have is interpreter.
Yes, I understand.
So my first draft was using patterns, but you were keen on using interpreter types, so we started these interpreter types.
I mean, okay. Are we sure that's okay? Let's open your page. So let me understand what a typical one of these would look like.
Actually, I have a test now because this one is not in the prototype build. I have another notebook that I can send it to you. You cannot run it, but it has examples on how it works.
Send it. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, but to what extent are we expecting to actually use things like the location interpreter and so on as part of the input and net evaluation function?
0.
So what are we doing with it?
So maybe. I mean, it depends. If you have a network that takes I don't know, an image and a location and does something with that, it's actually up to whatever you want to do.
Okay, but so what is the point here? The point is we want to have a type system to define what might come in, so that we know what autoencoder to use or what encoder to use.
Or like we want to validate the input before passing it and avoid that everything breaks, especially for the net evaluation function that we provide.
Okay.
It would be bad to.
Okay, fine. But so this is okay. So let me understand the purpose of this. So we are trying to validate. We are expecting to actually pass the input through something to validate or to convert.
To validate. It's just it will give a failure, like an interpreter failure if it's not correct. Like this.
So but we're not interested in converting it, even if it is.
Well, interpreter's main job is to deal with strings. And that doesn't come up for us.
Yeah, I don't think it's relevant. I mean, I just don't think it's relevant here. Okay, so let's take a look at what you've got here for this. Okay, but actually, there are a couple of things. So first of all, okay. Okay, so what is evaluator?
It will be the actual net evaluation function that takes arguments, the function, and does whatever you want it to do, like pre-processing, post-processing, mapping of the network.
Well, in particular, no, hold on a second. What specifically does it do? Because it's going to have. Let's just look at what this is going to look like. So, it's going to be. There's going to be eventually a net evaluation function that's going to have that's going to be returned by net model, and it's going to have some kind of net specification inside it. It's going to have your association that specifies various things. It specifies, it should specify a preprocessor, a postprocessor, and the actual network. Isn't that correct?
Preprocessor and postprocessor is everything inside the evaluator. I mean, it's a general object.
It's way more flexible this way.
But I understand, but it's going to ultimately, it's going to take some input. It's going to take the actual input to the network. I don't understand. Is this, okay, next question. Is this trainable or not? Or is only the net inside it trainable?
Only the net is trainable.
Only the net inside. The thing is that it's not just one like sort of layer that goes like a net encoder, net decoder. You may want to take one network, map it on the input, and then use another network, and then combine the two. So it like in certain pipelines you have more elaborate.
Yeah, I understand, but then why is there just a single thing called net here?
We discussed this the other time.
16 networks in this.
Exactly. There's a note just after that to say that the value can also be an association of multiple networks or layers.
And why do we want to even distinguish the net then? Why isn't this just a general function?
Because it's nice for the user to be able to query it and to see it.
Okay, so this is a little bit, so why is this not a net model?
This is the output. This would be the output of some net model calls.
But why isn't net model? Why doesn't net model have in it pre-processing, post-processing functions?
Well,
we had this discussion the other time. Is because you may use different net models, or I mean, net model is a bit tricky to use with multiple networks. And
well, so no. Let me give you a different answer. Net model is trainable, whereas this isn't in general.
Yes,
that's also true. Yeah. And by default returns a network. So yeah, you can just
also net model is not a head. So like we did, I mean, you came to the realization, you know, like you originally suggested, what if this was net model?
You're very loud, by the way.
You're loud, Tay.
Sorry, now he's now we can't hear him at all.
If I may say something.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tali. So this is a general program, right? And I think it's nice to have the repository output that because it's a small thing instead of a pure function. But for the custom one, what is really the added value of having it compared to a pure function?
We want to expose how to build these things because users will be able to submit models to the NeuralNet repo. And so,
I see.
As this will be a part of it.
Well, wait a minute. Is it a part or is it okay? So what is the workflow here? So there's a net model which has a name, right? And that name is being looked up in the NeuralNet repository, right?
Yes.
And what is returned from that is a network.
Yes.
Right? Okay. Now, do you also imagine that there are net evaluation functions that are returned by the NeuralNet repository, or what?
Exactly.
Yes.
But then they're not trainable.
Last time.
Then they're not trainable.
Well, they will have a trainable part, which is one or more networks, and then they will have, some extra Wolfram language code who's needed for.
Well, wait a second. Well, right now, by the way, do we have Megan in this call?
No, I don't think so.
If somebody can find her, that would be good. Okay, I got her. Okay, so I'm very confused here. Okay, net model is supposed to be the thing for accessing the NeuralNet repository, except now you're telling me that the NeuralNet repository might contain a net evaluation function. So net model, okay, so what you're saying is net model, instead of returning a naked net chain, it would return a net evaluation function wrapped around a net chain. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yep.
But so then we have to tag which of the networks directly in the NeuralNet repository are directly trainable and which are not. Isn't that correct?
All the networks are trainable.
I understand, but what's being returned here, look, normally the workflow would be to say net train of something which you get back. I mean,
hello.
Hi. So there's an uninitialized, what the trainable thing would typically be, but it might not be, you might want to train it from a state you already have here. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, and this is what we said, like that we with those keys, we still provide you with the networks, uninitialized or initialized.
Yes, basically.
Do we document somewhere that you are guaranteed that you can plug a net model into net train? because I don't think we do.
Yeah, we don't.
Well, but should it be the case?
Yes, but on the other hand, there are very interesting models which requires you to have additional code running besides the pure neural
No, I
network.
realize that. I realize
No,
that.
yeah, I was thinking about that. I mean, this would be like NetTrain looking into this and taking out the pieces and sort of.
I mean,
that can be also multiple networks. So,
but it's not going to work. I mean, that's very unlikely to work. To be able to, in the current state of the world, not every program is trainable, and we kind of have to. So then, what will actually happen if you call? I mean, if you call NetTrain on a net evaluation function, what is it going to do? Just generate an error message?
I guess it's similar to what you. I mean, the same one you get if you don't provide a valid network.
So, by the way, just so you know, like the net model already privileges evaluation over training. So the default content element is the evaluation network, which often can't be trained, or it can't directly be trained.
Fair enough.
You
have to say uninitialized, evaluation network or something to have something trainable. But maybe we need a different key in the net model to have a trainable thing.
There is. I think there's a train network. We often don't have that. But
Megan, do you know?
I'm just checking quickly.
You mean a content element of the resource object?
Yes.
The uninitialized one is the untrained network that can be trained.
But there should be another field. We haven't added it yet, but we discussed it already. There's evaluation net and there's training net, but we haven't added training net yet.
So training net would be the one with a loss layer, for example.
Exactly. We'll have a loss on it. Yeah.
Makes sense.
But none of the models has a training net key right now.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's loop back here to what we're talking about with net evaluation function.
Can I make a general thing about the story about the purpose of net evaluation function? I mean, it seems to be a very specific thing, like basically a pure function to have neural network in it. I don't know. I feel that maybe we could build something more general. I mean, is there a real reason why we want that to work only for networks, or as opposed to just to do like a pure function that would format well?
Yeah, but if you want to go more general than this, it just becomes Wolfram language code. Like it just becomes.
Yes.
I know. What
isn't what we discussed about the function repository, and somebody said it was too far away, and we want this now. I'm also super not convinced about the design, and that's usually when multiple people are not convinced, it's usually a bad sign.
Right. So look, let's talk about the function repository. Okay. So the function repository is going to have these things called resource functions. I mean, it's not going to be here for 11.3, but it is coming soon. And a resource function is something which comes from a resource object. The resource object has metadata. The resource function is the wrapper that actually is for evaluation. A resource function typically has some kind of representation that looks a little bit like an entity representation. Does that make sense to people? Now, I mean, it can contain anything, but let's take a look at the use case. All right, so the main issue that we have is in here when we have net model, okay, what is being said is that net model, in order to be useful for evaluation, net model has to have additional functions wrapped around that go beyond just the net chain and so on. Is that correct?
Right.
For some models.
For some models, I understand.
Wait, I just want to challenge that, because net model is not an object. Net model is purely a way of retrieving arbitrary data from the repository.
No, I agree. But the net model, the evaluation network, what is being called right now the evaluation net, we could imagine having a thing called evaluation function that was part of what comes back from net model, and we could imagine that evaluation function is actually the default of what comes back from net model, not evaluation net.
That's what we designed last time. That is this thing, as far as I understand.
Okay, yes. So are we imagining then that there's an additional content element in the resource objects for the repository? Is that right?
Exactly, exactly,
That
definitely.
is called evaluation function, which is normally, what would it normally be? It would normally just be the identity function. It would normally, for a network that is pure net chain, it would just be the pure net chain.
Sure.
Yes.
Now,
So
or maybe,
it should redirect to the evaluation network.
or maybe it could just be none, because we can select for each resource what's the default content element, I think.
I guess it's a point if you want to have like that. If you say net model without any second argument, it defaults alternatively to evaluation network or evaluation function, or it always defaults to evaluation functions.
It always defaults to evaluation function, but that may turn out to be just a naked net.
Yeah.
chain, net
So
graph.
in that case, we cannot return known. If you use it as a default element, it has.
Yeah, you shouldn't return none. That's a bad idea. You should return something that always runs.
Yeah.
That thing might be the same as it might just be a
Yes,
duplicate.
it might be the same as the evaluation net. Okay,
Yeah.
so now what is it? So what's a typical example of a wrapper that we want? I mean, again, we've also got to pass through options like probabilities and things like this, right?
Yeah.
Through whatever we're doing with the evaluation.
They often have options.
We have a property. We have a design for properties.
So yeah, that is like a way to call it in the valid syntax, the one that doesn't output errors. Right now, the evaluation function is just f, but that one is taking the network, like the input one option and a list of properties. And the list of properties is passed as a second argument, similar to what classifier function is doing. So you can say function of these comma probabilities, or list the probabilities classes.
Okay, but so I'm trying to understand what is a typical. Give me a specific example of an actual wrapper function used for a real case.
We already have those.
Okay.
For example, the colorization network.
Okay, well, what is the
Right
function?
now, we're distributing it as raw model. So if you do, you can go to the net repo website.
Basically, it's a network that provides you with the chromaticity of the two chromaticity channels, and you have to take the
Image processing, color net image
Yeah.
colorization is this one?
Yeah. Just take a look at the example notebook. So you see that this thing is tagged as raw model because in principle it needs an evaluation function, but we don't have that yet.
Okay, so where is the evaluation function? I mean, do you give it in the
Yes.
It's there. I mean, it's just
Somewhere the evaluation function.
evaluation function? This thing here. Okay, so this is a typical.
This is a very simple one.
This is a very simple one.
Yeah, this is like a toy model. But you could imagine, for example, mapping a network over a list of strings.
But still, this is something real. This is something that this will be the first real net evaluation function that we will have. It will be this guy here.
Okay, fine. All right. So let me just try to understand then. Okay, I get it. So the main issue then, I mean, to put this in as a function in NetModel so that it is, so what comes out here, I see. So the issue is you can't have this actually, this has to be something, there is a potential, you need it not being evaluated yet. You need it being held unevaluated because what you want here is, so in this case.
Pure function, but it would be ugly.
Yeah, right. But well, also the pure function wouldn't be, okay, so that's basically the thing you want. Is that correct?
Exactly. Correct.
Okay.
In this specific case, because it has no option, it has no property, it's a very simple one.
That would be specifically, that would be the evaluator key of the net evaluation function.
I don't think it should be called evaluator. I think it should be called, I mean, if it is anything, okay, so you're saying the pre-processing and post-processing is all packaged together here.
Yes, because in general, you want to be very flexible. There are a lot of cases in which you don't have pre and post processing, but
would it be convenient to have those as keys and then to have an overriding, a lower level key that is just the arbitrary function? I mean, in other words, sometimes it might be useful to be able to see this is the pre-processing, this is the post-processing.
Yeah. I mean, it would be something, but it would be still very complex because is it a function? What if you provide multiple arguments? Then you have to pass the association to the preprocessor, and then.
Okay, well, how does this deal with multiple arguments? So your concept of an evaluator function, how does it?
It passes an association with. I mean, if you specify that your arguments are, I don't know, image and length, it will give you an association with image goes to value, length goes to number.
Okay, so then what you imagine is that net evaluation function despite the fact that most net models just eat an arbitrary expression, you're proposing that net evaluation function typically eats an association. Is that right?
I mean, they don't eat an arbitrary expression. If there's only one argument, they eat that thing, which is what we also do. If you have a single argument, you can just pass it directly without the association. But if you have, for example, a net graph that has 2 ports, you have to provide an association with 2 inputs.
And that's what's happening right now with net.
Yeah, right now, yeah. We just copied the design to be like non-confusing. I mean, it's already confusing. We're trying to make it less confusing as possible.
Okay, so hold on. So so the issue, so what you're imagining is, by the way, somebody on a live stream with a, I'm guessing Japanese username, says if you're looking for a use case for location type input, maybe an inverse of that network, I think a network we were talking about earlier, take a location input and synthesize an image that looks like it comes from that location. Okay, that's a cool idea. Or style transfer a location to an existing image. That's a cool idea. Based on, for example, the that's a cool idea. I don't know whether there is such a I mean, inverting basically our wherever it is, our network for this one here, for finding geolocation. That's
so you provide a location, you get an image out.
Yeah, it'd be cute. But anyway, that's a case where the input might be a location, for what it's worth. I mean, it might be convenient to have an actual interpreter with something like where you can feed in Eiffel Tower as well as geolocation, this. All right, so let's come back then. So what you're saying is you want to have, let's say, this net evaluation function, and you basically want to have in it, I don't understand this. So this is, I mean, this is for some kind of error checking purpose. This is to so that we can have more packaged error checking.
When you build I mean, we need some way to build one of these net evaluation function, because if you want to expose it, if we don't want to expose it, it's fine. But if we want this to be, I mean, if we want that a user can upload a net model that contains one of those, it has to be clear how to build them. And so you have somehow to tell this object, you are going to see these kind of arguments. You're going to use this network. You're going to use these properties.
Well, but you're going to use potentially many networks. And I don't understand why. I mean, look, what you've got here seems like a very reasonable way to set this up, which has a network, embedded inside this function. It doesn't distinguish the network.
I agree. It seems like a complex framework for, I don't know, for little things, for just wrapping codes around a network.
So let's give an actual example. Like this example is a bit toy. So take machine translation. So the evaluation function, it has to take the network. It has to then do surgery on the network to separate the encoder and the decoder.
Well, there would probably be 2 networks to begin with, rather than having to separate it in the function, because that would be slow.
Who knows? Whatever. Either one. Then there's then you have arguments like what is the beam search size? Like that's an optional argument. It's going to call the model.
So what you're describing is it's got a lot of code in it.
Yeah.
The question is, what we really want there, the main issue is that we like the fact that net model produces a displayable thing here. The second thing that, let's imagine that we had a net evaluation function here. What would we actually display? So in the modern world, what you're proposing is that if I bring up the prototype build, if I'm not mistaken, you are proposing this initially closed, you're proposing this thing here, right? This initially closed representation of a net chain, for example, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
So what you want is something, I mean, the question of whether you can display explicitly, if you're not worried about displaying it explicitly, it's just a piece of code like any other piece of code, and you don't get to display it explicitly, but it will just run, right? Does that make sense?
In principle, we can return a pure function. And,
right, that's what I'm saying.
It takes things, yes.
So, but the only issue is that you want something that you like the fact that this is visible and displayable. But as soon as you have a complicated piece of code, like even this, it's not going to be visible and displayable. It's just going to be an arbitrary pure function.
Sure.
And the thing is it clear at all how you should operate it? It's like not self-documenting at all. Unless you can always read the code, but
No. But I mean, it's like anything else. I mean, the function plot is not self-documenting. It has documentation, and the documentation.
But it does only one thing. We are not going to have an. I mean, this if
we are going to have documentation for every network. That's what the NeuralNet repository does. That's its role, is to document these networks.
Yes, but it would be much nicer if you have it, directly in your notebook without having to go to the website and see.
Sure, it's nice to be able to query that stuff. Okay, because we believe somehow, I mean, we could imagine that every function does have, this is very confused, if I might say so. I mean, insofar as you want flexibility, you can't have it be structured. That is, every function, if I say, $plot, it's going to give me some documentation for how to use plot. Now, do I want to be able to have a programmatic version of this, which we haven't really needed? I mean, this, Wolfram Language data gives you a programmatic version of that for what it's worth, right? I don't think people use this all that much. But you can get a programmatic version of how to put arguments in at every function and so on. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's loop back again to what it is we really need. What the real issue is, what does NetModel actually return when there is a more complicated evaluation function needed for this model? Is that right?
Yes.
Couldn't we see, I mean, yeah, and a more general question is, what is this net repository about? Is it a repository of functions that are runnable? Or is it really something you return networks so you can train on them, so you can do surgery, so you can use it, and merge them and do another network? And then the function will kind of be a secondary aspect.
Right.
The main focus is to deliver deep learning functionality.
Is it really? Because we have a language for that. We do image identify, we do, I don't know, language translate, and so on. Maybe the functionality are really for a language, and the role of the repository is really to give networks.
I disagree. So if there's some technique that for whatever reason we haven't yet put into the system, or we may never put into the system because it's too specialized, but it still requires that you use 3 networks in a complicated way. It's very nice that someone can, it's basically kind of what people would be doing on GitHub now. Like they package up a bunch of networks.
Okay, but I could still have access to that by asking a specific property of NetModel to get the function. Like it's not like it's not there, and it will even be documented. But I have a feeling that if it's important enough that we should put it straight away in the NetModel, maybe it's important enough to be in the language as well.
No, but okay, look, the other point is, we would be having a different conversation if we had, if the function repository existed right now.
Correct.
Yeah, and maybe that's the right thing. We should wait for that to be finished.
But then we should also be very clear about what our requirements are so that the function repository doesn't turn out to be something else. Because if it's going to be something else, then we should do that.
The function repository is, we could get people in this meeting who are actually working on finishing the function repository. The function repository is well in progress. I mean, what we could do right now is in NetModel, we could imagine having an element here. I don't particularly like this, but well, we could have the element, evaluation function, which is not the default element, right?
Sure. Yeah, it doesn't have to be the default. We're not tied to that, I think.
And then that could be given arbitrary, given the thing that contains, so that will contain in addition the pure function that does the pre and post processing, and all is good.
So what I think going back to this thing about what the purpose of this whole thing is. So the one thing that I hate about pure functions is that you can't see easily what they're doing. So one of the most important things that this has to do is that if you just have a random net model and you don't know how to evaluate it on data, that's pretty useless. Like you want to be able to see, okay, here's how what the evaluation procedure looks like.
Yeah, well, fine. So then you want, but what you want then is you want some key here that says, input structure or something.
And it will be the same for resource function, right?
I'm not sure. We don't know how.
No, resource function. Look, resource function just has documentation because it's a general function. Right? Now,
I think it's really important to just say there are like 3 or 4 features we really want. Sebastian said one. Can we list the others? Otherwise, we all
fine.
think of.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
One is description of the inputs and what types they have, and validation of those types.
Do we really need the validation?
Well, I think validation is a bonus, which we can, that's nice, but I think that's a bonus. Description of
Fair enough.
Okay, next.
There is optional.
But I think there's a 0 thing, if I might say so, which is the wrapper function for evaluation.
The wrapper function for evaluation.
The function that you want to actually be using for the evaluation of the network.
The payload, yeah, of course.
Right.
That's the function, if we can call that the function payload, but there's another payload, that's the data payload. So there might be one or more nets.
No, that's not, no, I don't agree. I think that this function simply calls, this is where it's going to get totally messed up, right? Because a single net model, okay, is a single network right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, this will extend it to have.
You helped us design that in the last meeting.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
We agree.
The way that we extended it is that evaluation network, instead of, it mostly will be a single network. It could also be an association of networks.
Okay.
Are you worried because now net model with the evaluation function key may have a function that contains again net model with another key?
That is one of the things I was concerned about, but I mean, it doesn't have to. It can contain naked networks, net graph, net chain, etc.
I mean, it shouldn't, because then you're going to download the thing 3 different times, and it's the same thing underneath. It should,
no, I don't understand that. Look, if it happens that it has a dependency on another network that is exposed in the NeuralNet repository, then great, it can use NetModel. But if it uses its own custom 3 networks, then it should just have them right there in the actual net model.
No, so wait. So the evaluation function would be a pure function that would wait maybe 1 gigabyte.
Yeah, Stephen, we don't want that, because that means if you ever ask for those networks separately, you will have to download another gigabyte, and it's the same.
Okay, but so are those networks separate? Do they have separate entries in the NeuralNet repository?
I mean,
yes or no?
What we just said is evaluation. I mean, if it's an association with different keys.
But it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Look, if you can't refer to them, okay, then look, if those networks, if those subnetworks are themselves things which are independent resource objects, then great, they are cached separately, they can be referred to by other functions, etc.
That's one way of doing it, but that's not what we settled on last time. I mean, I just want us to recap what we settled on last time.
Okay, well, remind us.
Okay, so inside the pure, I mean, you could do it 2 different ways. The way that we discussed last time is inside the pure function, if you want to call it a pure function, you can directly call net model of yourself, evaluation net, and there's your network.
What do you mean by yourself? How would you specify that? What would it actually look like?
It's the name. It's the name that you are.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. The name.
Okay.
The second option is that
the name followed by what?
Evaluation network. That's the
but that's not the thing, because that's the whole evaluation network. What if there were 6 evaluation networks?
Then it's an association, and then you can subscript it easily because it's an association. There's no problem with that. You just do open square bracket of part 1, and then later on you do open square bracket of part 2, and so on.
I don't particularly like that. I mean, I think if we're going to do that, then we should have evaluation net. How should this work? Then we would have an association. This evaluation net should be an actual network, shouldn't it? It shouldn't be an association of networks.
Why not? If in the rare case that there are multiple networks, what better way of doing
No,
it is
because I think it should be a separate. Okay, let's keep going with what you thought we'd figured out last time.
right. So that's one thing. That's the wrapper function, and then this immediately separates the underlying data from the wrapper function. The wrapper function is pure code, and then the data is living in the net model in the way it always has. Then separately,
well, just a second.
sure.
Okay, go on. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a digression because originally we were supposed to describe what we wanted from the system. One was validation. One was property. There's an optional property that you might want out. Like there's a default output, and then there's a way of modifying to get a property.
Okay.
So there's like a list of
outputs, e.g., probabilities.
Right.
Okay.
That's good. And then there is, and this is important, there's options that you can pass in when you evaluate the thing. And they have
options to be passed to the wrapper function.
Yeah, that's another thing you can't do with a Mathematica pure function.
Ah, this is a mess.
I mean, I think this shows that we need something. I mean, this probably will be needed in other circumstances than for neural networks. And of course, I mean, the resource function is one example of them. So I don't know, I think this calls for a generic way to handling that, to create a pure function that make it easy to have these things and also format well.
Yeah, I mean, it's what I'd want from a function repository.
Right, this is what we're getting from the function repository.
Say
The
again?
only things you have to
It's
do,
what we're getting. Go ahead.
in order
What's
to make
missing?
it more general, the only things you have to do is to remove the net key and change the name of the thing, basically.
Yeah, but then we shouldn't reinvent the
function repository. Exactly.
I mean, I'm also agree with Etienne. Maybe the right choice here is to wait a bit. And as Tali was saying, just be super sure that we are ready to interface with the function repository when this is in a usable state.
Well, okay, so what we would do right now is we would have an additional key called evaluation function that
Is a pure function.
is a pure function that calls this net model in the cases of the, comparatively few networks right now where we need some sort of more sophisticated pre and post processing. But then what do we expect the final state of this to be? We expect the final state to be something where this neural net repository is purely a repository of neural nets that have the feature that they can always be, that they have this very definite structure. They would sometimes refer to, I mean, this is the, our function repository can perfectly well have a section. I mean, nobody cares in the function repository whether functions A, B, and C work with, computational geometry or machine, or neural nets or 6 other techniques, right? No. They're just doing what they're doing. I think I think part of the point here is that we are explaining that, we're supporting neural nets for the sake of having one be able to do sort of work with neural nets, just like we have. I mean, look, we could say for our data repository, we could say, well, guess what? We don't just want data in the data repository. We also want functions in the data repository, but that would be silly. The data repository is just blobs of data. And then you get functions that manipulate that data in different ways. So, I mean, the original discussion here was about a design. I mean, this is a completely separate thing. This business about designing, generalizing repeating element mechanisms to deal with arbitrary depth tensors. That's a perfectly valid thing to do, but I don't think it's urgent unless we're trying to use it for this purpose.
Yeah, exactly. We just brought it up because it was needed here.
Okay, so listen, I think what we're concluding is that right now, given that we're, about to freeze the system for the next version, that we should just add an evaluation function element to netmodel and use that in the cases where we have to use that. Does that seem reasonable to people?
Yes. If you're confident this function repository is coming for next version,
it absolutely is. It
Okay.
absolutely is. I mean, and it will be good to get a presentation for you guys of the function repository to make sure that it actually has the features we need. But let's just talk about the evaluation function here. Is the evaluation function going to refer to the current net model? Because in the construction notebook, how is it going to refer to the current net model, which has not yet been created, so to speak, when the construction notebook is constructed?
Well, in the construction notebook, you construct the net, so you can refer. The net will be some variable in that notebook, and you can use it.
No, but you shouldn't do that. I think you should call net model directly to retrieve the net inside the pure function. Otherwise,
Stephen was talking about the
one. We've got 2 copies of the net.
So, sorry, say that again.
I said the pure function, I think, should. I mean, I feel this is obvious. It should contain a call to net model. Right, that won't evaluate because it's a pure function.
No, I understand. I'm simply saying at the stage of building the construction notebook, and maybe Megan can speak to this. Maybe maybe we already have a mechanism for this in the data repository. I know, yeah. In fact, we do, don't we? For when you construct examples, you refer to the net model in some symbolic way when you're doing the construction of the notebook. Isn't that correct?
Yeah.
It's called something like $$ model or something. Is that right?
Yeah, well, it's like $$ object for the resource object, and then $$ data is the resource data.
Okay. All right, fine. Which in this case is the net model, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so then we can use that here. So that my concern about building the thing, that's okay, I think. Did that make sense to people? It's just you have to be able to refer to the net model before the net model has been created.
As long as it's clear that the final one will have explicit net model string, comma, net.
Yes, it will. Just like listen, when you create the examples, okay, you don't write net model of blah 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 because that has not been created yet. You write $$ data here, and that is converted to net model of blah blah blah.
But what if you want to use it to argument form? Is it? I mean, is the $$ data going to be?
Okay, I don't think that's going to work then. Yeah, I understand. It's not going to work in that case. So we need some mechanism. I mean, it just needs in the build process for the repository, we need some mechanism to deal with that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand. We'll figure something out.
Right, because I mean, in principle, the evaluation function could refer to itself, for example.
Yeah. Paying particular care about that, yes.
Right. By the way, we have a question from our live stream. Have we considered merging the NeuralNet framework with a more general pure function application? Layers are just fancy functions with types and hidden parameters. What is actually useful is updating its parameters through a training procedure, building computation graphs with them. In other words, is it possible to treat any function as a layer and make it work somehow? The answer is we're absolutely working on that. The issue is that in order to be a valid layer, you have to be able to do certain kinds of differentiation and so on the function. You also have to have it be able to work efficiently in GPUs and so on to do training, and that requires that we have some level of compilation of the function, and we are working on precisely that. And hopefully, I don't know whether I'm curious, what have you been? Can anybody comment on the status of customer layers?
The status is we're waiting on the compiler. So as soon as the compiler is ready, then we can do custom layers.
And have you been interacting with those guys to get to see what pieces are ready? Because there are pieces that are ready. I mean, there's plenty of stuff that can be compiled. Have you actually tried to see what's involved in putting it all together? I mean, don't you have to do automatic differentiation and things as well as just pure compilation?
So there's 2 things. One is we can try and differentiate with it symbolically first. And if we fail to do that, then the user has to give a derivative expression.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing, yeah. So it's an optional thing. The user gives a gradient function as well.
If that's the case, we should be in a position to do something right now, because the compiler can certainly deal with things that are, a very wide range of things that are symbolically differentiable.
Yes. So we decided that, yeah, like post this 11.3 freeze, we're going to push this. And also the main feature that we also want is the GPU support. And they've told us that it will take a little bit longer to add that.
Okay. All right, we should wrap this meeting. I think our conclusion here is evaluation function is the new key that we'll add. We will use that to implement these, sort of beyond neural net networks, and we will simply show in the examples how to use that.
Potentially a tricky issue. Sometimes we'll need to use module, like literally module of x equals whatever, right?
Yeah.
Those symbols that we introduce in the module have a context, and that context should probably not be global. But if it is global, it'll look nice if they look at the pure function. If it's not global, it'll look ugly, but it won't pollute their namespace. So
let's not cross that bridge right now. The module variables, let's simply not cross that bridge. We're going to have the function repository soon enough. It deals with all of those kinds of things.
Okay. But I'm saying, what do you want? Where should we put the symbols in a function?
I don't think you should have I mean, the question is, should the NeuralNet repository at the build stage have, as it creates symbols at the build stage, have a begin package thing in it? And my answer is probably, I don't think so right now, but if you want to have a better understanding of that, talk to Rick Hennigan, who's working on the function repository, because he's got a solution to that, I believe.
Okay.
Okay, but I do not know. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think we should. They're going to be module. If they are module variables, they're localized anyway. Don't worry about putting them in a different context, I think.
Okay, fine. Then I suppose global will at least look nice. It won't look horrible.
Yeah, and I think these are cases where this is part of a do-it-yourself kit anyway. This is not intended to be, the resource functions eventually will be the things that are not do-it-yourself kits and are just intended to be, fully
production ready. Yeah.
Yes. So, I think that's the right thing for this. Okay. Anything else for right now, right here?
Well, one concern with this may be what happens for the case in which you need multiple networks for the same model.
Let's just cross that.
Yeah. Okay, fine.
But I think what you want to do in that case is put into the NeuralNet repository the sub-networks as their own separate networks. Okay, and if necessary, they will be, if there are a lot of these, there'll be a bunch of networks. Like, for example, if we look at what's there already, there are some networks here which are, which could reasonably be, I don't know whether, are these all end user networks? I don't know. Right now, they mostly are. Isn't that correct?
Yes,
that's
they
correct.
are.
Okay, so, but we can certainly imagine something, and I'm surprised, like Daniel George's networks, for example, for signal processing. Are they here yet, or not?
No, there have been some licensing problems with the university, which are taking a while to get solved.
Right, okay, fine. Okay, but in any case, there are things there that that I think are more neural net component models, so to speak, that are intended to be used with other things and aren't necessarily end user models. And maybe we'll end up with, maybe eventually we'll have a section here that is called, component models or something, that contains things which might still be useful on their own, but which are not intended to be immediate end user neural nets. Does that make sense? Isn't it? Okay, here's a question.
Yes.
If there was a model, go ahead.
This case is exactly what, for certain internal functions, we definitely do this already. Like there's top level functions that call a net model, and we're not going to expose that net model to users. It's just an internal thing.
Sorry, I spaced for a second because I'm.
Oh, sorry.
So
we have certain, for things like find faces, for example, we might have, and I think there's already some examples of this where, there's net models that are not exposed to users. They're just
like the new facial features has landmarks model, and some of them are exposed, some of them are not. But we may go at a different pace with the repository.
Fair enough. But okay, fine. So we'll have a thing for component models, so to speak, that might or might not make it onto the, this front page will eventually get reorganized when it gets too big.
Sure.
And, there may be a section called component models that most people won't really care to look at, but people might find useful to browse, because they want components for something else they're building. All right, I think we have a path forward. So,
Cool.
Yep.
great. All right.
Yeah, thanks.
All
Talk
right.
to you all soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
All right.